Getting the captives out is, although a priority, not possibly a priority.
Considering the growing presence of religious right-wing figures in the Israeli military and government, how does this influence the approach to its citizens and captives? We have not seen this many Israelis taken captive since the 1973 Middle East War.
It is an all-out war. That's how Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan describes an invasion of the Golan Heights and the east bank of the Suez. Everyone agrees that this is the most serious fighting in the area.
The majority of Hamas's captives are civilians, and the situation is very different than anything seen in the past. There are also more medium and high-ranking officers from the religious right in the military than ever before, and the government itself is dominated by far-right settlers. And this has led to a new kind of group thinking where Israelis are expected to sacrifice themselves for their homeland, meaning citizens give the military their children and the state has no obligation to bring them back. The fact that so many of the captives belong to the more liberal side of Israeli society means that the issue has begun to reflect the political situation before the 7th of October.
We are people of peace. Obviously, there's an occupation in this country and it needs to end.
Friction between the two Israels is being manifested. On one hand, by the campaign led by the families of the captives, and the government, which is dominated by religious Zionist fundamentalists for whom winning the war takes priority over everything.
And really, it's no secret that the family members of these hostages had been tearing into Benjamin Netanyahu and the current coalition government over its handling of a number of issues involving this war.
For months before the attack, hundreds of thousands of Israelis were staging weekly demonstrations against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. Israelis were grappling over another battle deemed existential: Netanyahu's judicial reforms and the hollowing out of Israeli democracy. At least half of the Israeli public had no confidence in their prime minister before the war. And since then, Netanyahu has done nothing to convince them he is the right man to bring the captives home either. Netanyahu's popularity has never been lower. A poll published found that the prime minister's Likud party winning just 17 of parliament's 120 seats if an election was held today. Another poll found that only 4% of Jewish Israelis find that Netanyahu is a reliable source of information about the war. And so there is a suspicion that he wants to continue the war, during which it would be very difficult to remove him. Ben-Gvir, the far-right Minister of National Security of Israel, said, "No war, no government," and threatened to end Netanyahu's government if Israel does not resume bombing Gaza. The captives' families and other commentators believe that Netanyahu is in no hurry to stop the fighting and to free those held in Gaza. In fact, he has barely spoken to the captives' families. It took him 2 months to meet some of their representatives, leaving them feeling abandoned. And when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office requested to meet with the family members of the captives and representatives of the Gaza border communities, many refused the request. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's corruption trial has resumed this week, where he's facing charges of exchanging political favors for gifts and regulatory benefits for positive news coverage. And this is why many believe that Netanyahu pushed for the judicial overhaul to attempt to shield himself from prosecution. But 2 months into the war in Gaza, and he is more popular than ever, with the majority of Israeli society believing he must resign as soon as the war ends. And while he can see the growing divide in his country, he also knows that the longer he can continue the wage war, the longer he can fight over his political survival.